Hi, everybody. I'm Sundeep. I'm a managing partner at Felicis, and I'm super excited to have Brendan from Mercor here. Brendan Foody is the co-founder CEO of Mercor. They built an incredible business centered around human expertise in the age of AI. Brendan has been working at the intersection of labor markets and AI for the past few years now, and built an incredibly fast-growing company. But we're here to talk about the future of work, what he's learned about from building Mercor, and how to build a breakout AI company in today's moment. So let's start with the biggest question, that's on everybody's minds. I feel like we've had now two viral moments, I would say jaw-dropping, viral, however you want to describe it, in the world of AI, at least to me personally, when ChatGPT first launched and now hundreds of millions of users experience the reinvention of search, and that was a unique moment. And I feel like a few weeks ago with Claude Code and Opus, there was almost a second magical moment for a lot of us, especially folks like me who was a CS major and used to writing thousands of lines of code, and what it produced was amazing. And it feels like even though those two things have happened for consumers and developers, we haven't had that magical moment happen in enterprise AI. Why do you think that is, and what's blocking that?
Totally. I think that the reason is all of the data available to enable each of those problems. When trying to solve the problem in search, the models can learn the entire open internet and have all of that context available to deliver instantly. When trying to automate coding, we're able to use the foundation of GitHub and very clear verifiers and unit tests to help build these incredible models using all of the environments to train them. But when we look at other domains such as investment banking, consulting, or law, we don't have these giant corpuses of knowledge online that answer exactly what the model should be doing in each given case. And so that requires an enormous amount of humans putting in the work to create the right context, to build the RL environments, et cetera, to train agents across all of these different verticals.
And it's interesting because there's this entire discourse this year around enterprise context and enterprise data.
Yeah.
And one of the schools of thought is that if you just take the PDFs, if you just take the Slack messages, you take the CRM, and you scrape it all, and you throw it into the context window, the enterprise workflows are going to work magically. It sounds like you disagree with that.
Well, I think there's two problems. I think first of all is that the models aren't used to reading all of that type of data and understanding exactly how to use it, because that's not in the distribution that they're trained on. And so most people find that when they connect it to their email and they get it to try to write an email while pulling context from a couple of different files, the models totally break down. I think the second issue is that so much of the knowledge in enterprises doesn't live in writing. It lives in people's heads. And so that creates this enormous challenge with how do we use that knowledge to more effectively enable the models and get humans to ultimately train agents.
Can you add a little bit more in terms of what do you think is going to happen to enterprise workflows in terms of how many of those are going to be just context engineering? How many of them are going to be, you have to train your own models in order to see the performance?
Totally.
How many of them are going to require a completely different approach?
Well, I'll give the example with our customer support team, where now we have 80% of the people on our customer support team that are building evals for our customer support agent and updating context for that agent to effectively respond to questions. And I think it'll be the same across every workflow, where instead of having the support rep that is redundantly responding to hundreds of similar tickets, they're going to do that problem once, train an agent how to do it, and then go on to the next problem that the agent needs to know how to do. Instead of having lawyers that are redundantly doing dozens of similar red lines, they'll train an agent how to do that thing. And so for the same reason that software ate the world in this fixed cost investment that could be amortized many times, I think it'll be the same with agents. Of humans training agents how to automate these workflows within the economy, and then allowing agents to continue doing those redundant workflows that humans no longer want to do, so that people can go on to the next thing. And it's the same way that you or I scale our companies, right? We can't do everything ourselves, and so we need to train people within our companies to do those workflows effectively. And I think that's what a huge portion of work is going to converge on. And the irony of it being that in a lot of ways, the future of AI is actually very human. And that's the bottleneck to getting the right context in so many of these processes.
That's a great point. you built Mercor by trying to put humans in the middle of AI and human expertise specifically. And even though it feels like the returns to knowledge have gone down, as these models are able to ingest like enormous amounts of knowledge and then spit it out at a moment's notice, it feels like the returns to expertise, on the other hand, have gone higher in the world of AI.
Well, I mean, the reason we started the company is we felt like the most important problem in the world is what we do all day for work and how the knowledge work economy operates. Yet there's such a dearth of great entrepreneurs and companies that exist in solving that problem. And obviously, I think that we're at a moment in time where that is among the most important problems that we need to answer. And I firmly believe that humans training agents and working alongside them in the workforce and leveraging them is a giant portion of what that future will look like.
Can you talk about the network effects of human expertise, something that you talk a lot about?
Yeah. Well, I think it's fascinating that we have these enormous networks of drivers that we can, order via Uber. We have the network for apartments that we can find on Airbnb. Yet the closest thing we have to a network effect in the labor marketplace is LinkedIn, which is almost the worst product that I use every day. And I think that's a interesting dichotomy where I believe there needs to be a much better system of record for understanding what is everyone's skills, what are they capable of, what are their expertise within the enterprise and more broadly, so that we can effectively deploy human knowledge in the best way possible. And I think that it's the most important network effect that hasn't been built yet.
You're currently selling sort of a lot of expert human data to the labs and increasingly starting to talk to the enterprises about deploying their models and customizing those models, and as well as improving the data acquisition as well as hill climbing. What's your sense in terms of how far does this go in terms of, like, we're seeing now long-running agents that are doubling every few months.
Yeah.
Is that a function of compute or is that a function of data?
It's largely a function of data. Like, the amazing thing to me is that reinforcement learning is becoming so effective that once we have an eval, a way to measure success, the models can saturate it very quickly. And so, but the generalization is not as strong as most people realize. And so the barrier to applying agents to the entire economy is how do we build evals for every workflow that we need those agents to learn? And that's why we're seeing this enormous investment from the frontier labs, in some cases growing their budgets by an order of magnitude year over year to train better agents and codify all of this human knowledge into the models.
Speaking of agents, one of my favorite things that you mentioned, I think it was last week, was you talked about this one specific benchmark on which you looked at management consulting tasks, the kind of stuff that McKinsey does. And the output of that benchmark was you found that 50% of the tasks that a management consultant does, agents were able to do, but it took them 8 tries. Is that good or is that bad? Should McKinsey be worried? Are they cooked?
Well, I think it depends a lot on how much McKinsey leans into the technology, but maybe I'll add 2 things with respect to that benchmark. The first thing is that the models a year ago were dramatically worse, scoring less than 5% on the benchmark, versus now frontier models with one attempt are approaching 40%. And so the rate of improvement is absolutely phenomenal. And then the second thing to observe in that benchmark, the AI Productivity Index, is that when we gave models more tries, they did dramatically better. So the frontier capability when we launched it was at 23% if you gave models 1 try. But if you gave them 8 tries, it got up to 40%. And that's the reason that test time compute also works, and the reason RL works, where there's this variance. Models can attempt the problem a lot of times and get a reward if it solves it properly. And so I think that we will see much longer trajectories where models reason for a very long time because they do better when they're able to attempt problems more frequently.
And what's your view on the whole thing that's happening with the SaaS in a stock meltdown?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm extremely excited about the world of software. Like, I think that with almost every technology company, we're bottlenecked by the ability to build great software and ship new features. And when we make that 10 times faster, it's going to be profoundly impactful on all of our businesses and all of our lives, and just making the products that we use far easier and more intuitive. I think that there are certain SaaS companies that will struggle with that. I think that the companies that have network effects will probably benefit the most, and that those network effects are generally very difficult to recreate, and those companies will be able to ship features around them. So think Meta will be able to ship many more features to improve our user experience, but no one's going to be able to duplicate the social network overnight. And I think that will apply to a lot of other businesses that tend to have these durable moats, where they're able to build features and software around them to ship much faster and improve user experiences.
You know what I find fascinating about this cycle of tech is that in the dot-com era, when Amazon came out, they basically said, hey, I'm going to disrupt your neighborhood bookstore. Mm-hmm. Or when in mobile, we said, hey, we're going to disrupt the taxi industry, or we're going to disrupt the hotel industry, or something else like that. It was almost always some other industry, but not the tech industry. And it feels like in the age of AI, the first two industries we're attacking, say a ChatGPT was attacking the Google monopoly or the Facebook monopoly. And now with Claude, it's kind of almost like the tech industry is the one that is being disrupted from within. In some ways, that's exciting because we're kind of dogfooding ourselves. But what's your view on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the reasons is that people in the tech industry often are the most early adopters and eager to try new technology, similar to how Uber was first adopted in San Francisco. But every engineer on our team is loving using the coding tools, and it's making us hire even more engineers because the productivity of each person is going up. And so I think that will be a trend that continues. And the companies that lean into the technology and how they can adopt it the fast, as Michael was saying, are those that are going to pull ahead.
What's your sense in terms of the role of humans maybe 10 years out?
I think there are going to be a lot more jobs in 10 years than there are today. And it reminds me of 100 years ago, Keynes predicted that people would all be working this 20-hour work week because they said that there would be these productivity improvements that meant that we no longer needed to have these grueling jobs or put in so many hours. But ultimately, when we improved productivity across the board, that meant that humans were able to do so much more. And I think that while there's obviously going to be near-term job displacement, there's no shortage of problems that we need to solve as a society. We need to solve climate change and cure cancer and go to Mars. And I think within that broader demand of problems that we need to solve, there are an immense amount of things that humans can do that models can't do, which won't change anytime soon. And humans will play an enormous role in the answer to all of those questions.
How far do you think human expertise is going to stretch? I think you were talking about how it could be skill trades, it could be niche hobbies, it could be a whole bunch of other stuff, not the normal stuff that we're expecting in terms of human expertise for coding or legal expertise or healthcare expertise. That's, how far do you think that goes?
I think it'll be many decades, but I'll also delineate between knowledge work and physical world because human expertise applies to both. I think that within knowledge work, there is this huge long tail of context that lives in people's heads that models will need to learn and understand over time, and especially making that happen in the enterprise will be difficult and a lot of work. But I also think there's an enormous amount of human expertise in the way we run scientific experiments in the physical world or all of the other things that we would want robots to be able to do. We're hiring for projects where we have scientists that are running experiments that models give them and then reporting back on the performance of those experiments so that models can use those as the eval. And I think that we're a very long way from models having superhuman capabilities also in the physical world. And that feels like it'll be an enormous demand for human labor and human jobs for many decades to come.
Maybe one last question. Do you want to talk a little bit about the culture that you've set at Mercor? I think it's pretty unique.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have a few values. We tend to hire lots of former founders, people that are super entrepreneurial and work really hard. We work long hours, and I think it's because there's this feeling that we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to define the most important category in the economy of what we all do for work. And we need to make sure that our level of intensity is commensurate with that. We also have a culture that I think tends to lean a lot into young people that are doing great things. And so there's obviously a lot of nuance across all of those, but those are some of the core characteristics.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.